My name is Emily, and I'm 35 years old. I've been a homemaker for 10 years, married to my husband, a doctor named Michael. We haven't been blessed with children, but we've been living a reasonably happy life. However, something happened that put an end to our 10 years of marriage. It happened one day. "Emily, this is the end for us," said Michael, who came home late as usual.
"What do you mean by the end? What are you suddenly talking about?"
"I've decided to marry my mistress. So, we're getting divorced today."
"Marry your mistress? What are you talking about?"
"I've made up my mind. I'm leaving you and marrying her. Besides, we didn't marry for love, so you probably don't care, right?" Indeed, ours wasn't a love marriage. Michael's parents were eager for him to marry and found me as a suitable partner. We hardly knew each other and got married quickly. The only thing we had in common was that we originally had the same last name. People might say it's fate that we have the same last name. I thought, attracted by the idea in the rush of surrounding marriages, and decided to marry him. Since then, we managed our wedding and married life well enough. But I never imagined we would divorce after 10 years.
"It wasn't a love marriage, but we've lived together for 10 years. And now you suddenly want to marry your mistress? When did you start betraying me?"
"It's not betrayal. I met her about a year ago. She's a nurse who joined our hospital. She's charming, unlike you, always caring for me, and it's natural that I was drawn to her."
"Natural? Are you serious?"
"Yes, I've always been serious. These 10 years living with you have been true hell. I was honestly sick and tired of supporting such a boring woman. But that ends today."
"How can you talk like that?"
"It's the truth. You're a homemaker who produces nothing, while she's an active nurse. Ask any man in the country, they'd all choose her over you. Do you think a high-earning doctor like me needs someone like you?" After a pause, I was the first to speak. "Fine, let's divorce. I never thought I'd be married to someone who could say such things so calmly. We can discuss alimony and property division later with a lawyer. I'll sign the divorce papers and send them later. Until then, I'll go back to my parents' house." But then Michael interrupted. "No need for discussions. We don't even need a divorce paper."
"What do you mean? We can't separate without it. If we don't divorce, you can't remarry."
"You're so naive, it's pathetic."
"What?"
"The truth is, I never submitted our marriage registration. We're not a married couple, just cohabitants. So there's no divorce, no alimony, no property division. You thought you'd get my money in the divorce, but you won't get a penny." That day, Michael was supposed to submit our marriage registration. But I couldn't go because of an urgent matter. But it turns out he never submitted it.
"Not submitted? Wait, are you joking? We've been living as a married couple for 10 years. It's impossible that you didn't submit it."
"Normally, yes. That's why I made that rule at the beginning. If you went to the office, everything would be ruined. When we got married, we made some rules. I, as a homemaker, would handle all the household chores. I was on an allowance, and part-time work was prohibited. And Michael would handle all governmental and official matters."
"Why would you do such a thing?"
"Why? Because I was about to be forced into a marriage with someone I didn't love. It's not like I was going to submit it easily. I was saving marriage for someone I was destined to be with."
"Then you should have refused the marriage proposal in the first place."
"I couldn't refuse. My parents are stubborn and wouldn't listen. What would have happened if I said I didn't want to marry? Plus, I wanted a housekeeper."
"Housekeeper?"
"I'm a busy doctor and can't often tend to household chores. So, I decided to marry you as a housekeeper. It was a good deal for you too, right? You could eat well and have a roof over your head without working. You seemed desperate to get married, too."
"What?"
"You were probably feeling pressured because your friends were getting married, right? Even though we weren't actually married, you were seen as the woman who married a doctor. This 10-year relationship was a win-win for both of us. That's all it was, and it ends today." You should be grateful for the good times you had. Now, you have to live on your own, without relying on others.
I can't believe this.
Oh, and one more thing. Don't tell my parents about this. If you do something unnecessary, you know what will happen to your father, right? My father, who runs a medical equipment sales company, has a contract with the hospital where he works. It was through my marriage to him that this connection was made. If I told my in-laws, he's implying that he'd sever the contract as a threat. In other words, he's threatening me not to do anything unnecessary. It's your fault for being deceived. How pitiful to be thrown out with nothing, he said, laughing. But the one who would be thrown out without knowing anything was actually him. I couldn't help but burst into laughter.
What's so funny all of a sudden?
I can't believe you became a doctor with that kind of knowledge.
What do you mean?
I knew all along about your mistress and that you didn't submit our marriage registration.
That's impossible.
That's why I've been preparing, waiting for the day you'd bring it up yourself. Preparing to get my revenge on you. In fact, I had suspected his infidelity for the past 6 months. But I didn't have enough evidence to confront him. So, I hired a private investigator to look into his affair.
Ma'am, there are 2 things I need to tell you.
The first is that your husband is indeed having an affair. We've got evidence of him entering a hotel with a nurse from his workplace. And the second is, from their conversations, there's a possibility that you two are not legally married.
Possibility of not being legally married? What does that mean?
I overheard your husband and his mistress at a cafe. He said they didn't need to worry about alimony or property division since they never submitted a marriage registration.
What? I can't believe it. We've been living as a married couple for 10 years.
I don't know why he didn't submit the marriage registration.
That's why he never let me handle any official procedures.
Yeah, that seems to be the case.
I can't believe this. How could this happen?
It's rare to hear about not submitting a marriage registration for 10 years, but it's not unheard of.
This is too much. Am I just supposed to accept this? If we were never married from the start, there's nothing I can do.
Not necessarily.
What do you mean?
Let's make him pay for deceiving you for 10 years. First, we need to prepare without him noticing. And so, I began to prepare with the investigator to punish my husband.
So what if you knew? We were never married from the start, so it doesn't matter what I do with other women. I don't need to take any responsibility.
You said I was pitiful for not knowing anything, but it seems you were the one who was pitiful.
What do you mean?
We're considered to be in a common law relationship on paper.
So what?
You might not know, but you can actually claim alimony and divide property in a common law relationship.
What?
He didn't know that registering as a de facto marriage would backfire on him.
You can make claims in a common law relationship?
It's not well known, but yes, you can. Of course, there are some conditions, but looking at your case, it seems you meet them.
What are these conditions?
The common law relationship is established based on these 2 criteria. First, both parties must have the intention to marry. If it's just living together, that's cohabitation. Mutual intent to marry is key.
That seems subjective and hard to judge.
For instance, if you had a wedding ceremony or are recognized as a couple by others, it can be acknowledged.
We've had a wedding ceremony, and our parents and friends know us as a couple.
Then the first criterion is met. The second is living as if married. This includes sharing household life for over 3 years. You've been living together as a couple for over 10 years. As a homemaker, you've obviously shared the household finances. This is recognized as a marital relationship.
So that means,
if you can provide proof of what we discussed, you can claim alimony and divide property. I'm not an expert in this area, so I'll introduce you to a lawyer. You can work with them to bring him down. After consulting the lawyer I was referred to, I was told that I could indeed claim alimony and property division from my husband. So, I'm going to demand alimony and property division from you. I informed my husband, who turned pale. His confidence, which had looked down on me just a moment ago, was gone.
But even if you can claim alimony and property division, you're just an unemployed woman. Do you plan to rely on your parents after being kicked out?
Didn't I say I was preparing? I've already found a job, starting next month. I've also got my eye on a new place. Don't worry about me.
What?
He thought I, a clueless homemaker, would be helpless. But the tables had turned. Also, I'll make sure to discuss this with your parents. Just so you know.
Do you not care what happens to your father?
If they want to break the contract, let them.
What?
Sure, you were the link to the hospital, but the contract continued because of my father and his company's efforts. Whether or not they keep the contract is up to them. Let's see if they'll break a contract just because the doctor's wife of 10 years was a lie. Try saying that.
You!
My father and I won't be affected. If the contract is broken over this, it only shows the depth of their trust. We'll just find another hospital to partner with. Saying this, I took out my phone.
You're not calling your parents, are you?
That's exactly what I'm doing. Our parents think we're still married. It's only natural to inform them if this relationship is ending. Then, to my surprise, my husband began to apologize to me.
Please, let me talk to them. Don't call.
Why?
You know how strict my parents are. If they find out about this, I'm done.
What does that have to do with me?
Huh?
You're asking me not to tell the truth because your parents are strict? Are you kidding? You could have refused the marriage from the start if you didn't intend to marry. After 10 years of a selfish marriage, you're afraid of your parents finding out? I can't accept such a convenient story.
But
I can't accept your story. I'll make sure to tell both your parents and mine. And so, I called both sets of parents. All four were shocked upon hearing my story. A meeting was promptly arranged at our house.
I've heard everything over the phone. Is it true that you pretended to be married for 10 years without submitting a marriage registration? Speak up. You foolish son. It's true, I didn't submit it. Why would you do such a thing? Didn't you think about how Emily would feel? I had no choice. No choice, you say? How can you even say that? It's actually your fault, Dad and Mom. I didn't want to get married yet. You started looking for a bride on your own, saying it was time I got married. You arranged meetings and tried to force a marriage on me. You're the one who agreed to the marriage, aren't you? I had to agree. If I had refused, you would have made a fuss about it. So, I decided to get married. If you were resolved to marry, why didn't you submit the marriage registration? I read about a man on the internet who was in the same situation. He didn't want to marry but had to because of his parents. He lived a married life without submitting the registration, then revealed the truth when he found someone he truly loved.
That's appalling.
And what happened to that guy in the end? He's now married to the person he loves and has a real marriage. So, I too will marry my girlfriend and have a real marriage.
Then my parents, who had been silent until now, spoke up after hearing his reasoning. A real marriage, huh? Sure, you might not have had a love marriage. But do you remember what you said at the wedding?
What?
We will never forget to care for each other and build a home full of smiles. What did those words mean to you? What were we shown then? We sent our daughter to you, hoping for her happiness. But you deceived her for 10 years without submitting a marriage registration. Did you build a home full of smiles? Now, you're leaving her for another woman. Can someone who acts without a shred of care, even if they change partners, truly have a real marriage?
Well, that's...
I was happy you married our daughter, not just because you were a doctor. I thought she could build a happy home with someone as sincere as you. But it seems we were mistaken and deceived. And you threatened our daughter. If she told us about this, you'd cut off the contract with our company.
What? Seriously? If you're going to threaten our daughter, we'll cut off the contract ourselves. Be warned, we will tell the truth when asked why. If you do that, there'll be rumors at the hospital.
Rumors?
Well, yes, but that's the result of your own actions. You were the one who threatened us with cutting off the contract.
My husband was in complete panic at this unexpected turn of events.
Please wait. This is getting out of hand. Let's just talk.
At that moment,
Don't mess with us.
my father-in-law grabbed my husband by the collar, furious.
We didn't raise you to be such a scoundrel. What were you thinking? Father, please stop. By not submitting the marriage registration, you might have thought you were doing yourself a favor. But because of your selfish actions, Emily was strung along for 10 years. What were you thinking, causing such trouble to others?
The living room fell silent. My husband, faced with my father-in-law's words, had nothing more to say.
Emily, and your parents, I'm truly sorry for the trouble caused by this idiot. No, you parents shouldn't apologize. It's not your fault. However, it's partly our responsibility as parents for letting him act this way. For now, we'll take him home and make sure he doesn't continue his reckless behavior. We'll deal with the aftermath properly. We're very sorry for all this.
And with that, my husband was taken away by his parents, back to his childhood home.
You've been through a lot. For now, you should come back home and rest. We'll think about what to do next later. You don't need to worry about anything right now.
My parents thought I was completely exhausted and deceived. They spoke to me with such kindness.
Thank you, but I won't go back home yet. I still have things I need to do.
I declined their offer and stayed in my own home. What I had to do was prepare for the final settlement with my now ex-husband. Gathering evidence for our common law relationship, I was getting ready to claim alimony and divide our assets. A few weeks later, a meeting with a lawyer was arranged. However,
even if I agree to alimony, why should I divide my property? She's been a homemaker for 10 years, never working a day. All the furniture, clothes, food, I paid for everything. Now you're telling me to hand over the money I worked hard for and the furniture I bought? He ranted, unable to accept that his money would be shared with me.
Yes, that's correct.
The money you earned and the furniture are subject to property division. Why does it have to be like that?
Who did the housework while you were working? Who cooked meals with the groceries you bought?
That's irrelevant now.
No, it's very relevant.
A homemaker is entitled to property division because housework and childcare have economic value. Speaking as a human, not just a lawyer, do you think housework is something anyone can do, that it's just expected of a homemaker? The reason you could live freely is because of her support. Don't get that wrong. What? And this situation is a result of your actions. Yet, you have the audacity to be selfish. What did you say? Never mind. Anyway, she's entitled to half of the assets for property division. That's how it is. Damn. Regarding alimony, we intend to claim $100,000 from you. $100,000? Why so much for a relationship that wasn't even a marriage? It's precisely because you weren't married. Normally, alimony claims in common law relationships range from $10,000 to $40,000. However, in your case, you pretended to be married for 10 years and selfishly tried to kick her out when you found someone else. The amount is determined by the severity and duration of your actions. But still, you may think 10 years is just a short time, but it's longer than you realize. During that time, she devoted herself to you, believing you were a married couple. You have no right to complain after betraying her.
A perfect rebuttal. He couldn't say anything and reluctantly agreed to my demands. Then, I also sent a notice of claim for alimony to his mistress. I knew who and where she was, thanks to the investigator. As he had said, she was a nurse working at the same hospital. The mistress, having heard from him that there was no possibility of alimony or property division, must have been utterly shocked by the contents of the claim.
Wait a minute. This isn't what you told me. What do you want? I told you not to talk to me at the hospital. I got this from your wife. You said there wouldn't be any alimony because we weren't married. What's this all about?
I later learned that, in a panic after being served with the alimony claim from me, she confronted him at the hospital with the notice I had sent.
Okay, let's talk about this later. Not here, there are too many people around. We'll both be in trouble if this turns into a rumor. I don't care about that. I can't pay this kind of alimony. You said it was okay, so you should pay it for me. What? I won't pay a penny. You were the one who wanted this relationship. You said I was the only one for you, that you wanted to marry me. Hey, quiet down. Everyone can hear us. Just so you know, I'm not in the wrong here. If you want to make amends with your wife, do it yourself. Tell her I don't owe her a penny, that you'll take care of everything. Wait, hold on. Hey!
This exchange led to the revelation of their affair to the entire hospital. It quickly became the talk of the place. And then, the final blow was my father's request to the hospital. I apologize, but we would like to terminate our contract at the end of next month. Then, the hospital, aware of the rumors, asked my father, "Excuse me for asking, but is the reason for canceling the contract related to Dr. Michael's affair?"
It's already become a rumor? Yes, a nurse presumed to be involved caused quite a scene. I never imagined he had been pretending to be married for 10 years without submitting a marriage registration. I never expected it to turn out like this. You mean he never submitted the registration? Weren't you aware that he hadn't submitted the marriage registration? All we knew was that he, being married, had an affair. What do you mean he didn't submit the marriage registration?
With my father's request, it was revealed that he had been deceiving me for 10 years by not submitting the marriage registration. This news spread among the other nurses.
Dr. Michael deceived his wife for 10 years without submitting a marriage registration. And he had an affair with a nurse. How low? How could he do that? Can someone really not notice for 10 years? Apparently, Emily's maiden name was the same, and he managed all the official paperwork. That's scary.
The rumors spread not only among hospital staff but also to patients, and both Michael and his mistress received cold stares. Unable to endure, they soon resigned from the hospital. As my father told me.
Did you manage to get the alimony? Yes, I received payments from both him and his mistress. She refused to pay until the end, claiming she was deceived. But the lawyer made it clear her argument wouldn't hold, and she reluctantly agreed to pay. That's good. What about you, Dad? Did the contract get cancelled after all? No, that's off the table. He resigned, and since our company is trusted, the hospital asked us not to cancel the contract. We couldn't cancel it after they asked like that. That's a relief.
Then, I started a new life in a new place and was living happily. About 1.5 years later, my ex-husband contacted me.
Is it true you got remarried?
I had married a man I met at work. And somehow he had found out.
I wondered whose number this was. Going through the trouble of changing your number just to contact me. Just answer my question.
Yes, I got married.
You betrayed me?
Betray?
We were never legally married, so I didn't think it would matter to you, right? That's a different matter.
Indeed, things are different now. We're completely separated, so my marriage has nothing to do with you.
Is that why you contacted me?
After I said this, he seemed at a loss for words. Then he taunted, "Of course, you're still unmarried since you probably haven't submitted a marriage registration again. You're that kind of woman." But things weren't as he imagined.
Unfortunately for you, my husband isn't the kind of person to do such terrible things. He knows all about your story. So, to ensure I wouldn't feel anxious, we went to the office together to submit the registration. Sadly for you, things aren't as you thought. I can somewhat understand your wish for me to be unhappy, considering your own misery, but sorry, we're happily married.
I told him this and hung up the phone. What kind of life he leads now, I don't know. But unless he changes his selfish nature, it's unlikely he'll ever find happiness. Get out, I'm going to live with her. I was stunned by Sean's sudden loud declaration. Behind Sean, I saw Kathy smirking. Probably, Kathy had persuaded Sean to take this action. Regaining my composure, I thought for a moment and responded. I was glad I had been suspicious and investigated. I had already started moving towards divorce, so Sean choosing Kathy didn't matter to me. But their naivety was astounding. Telling me to leave, how dare they? Fortunately, I have a strong ally. I'm going to teach these two a lesson about reality. My name is Margot McLean, a 30-year-old office worker. I met my husband, Sean, at the same company we worked at. Sean, from a different department, worked in sales while I was in planning. We first met at the company-wide welcome party for new employees. We happened to sit next to each other and hit it off, exchanging contacts then and there. A few months later, he asked me to go out, but I was new and too busy learning my job to think about dating. Sean said, "I'll wait until you are ready." 2 years had passed, and by then, I had become quite proficient at my job. On my 24th birthday, when we went out for dinner together, we decided to have a relationship. Sean was very handsome, and dating him made me the envy of many. After 3 years of dating, he proposed, and we got married. I lived alone in a house, and Sean moved in with me. I have a close sister. Her name is Mina Turner, a designer currently working overseas. I told Mina about living with Sean. Mina, who couldn't come to our wedding, said, "Then I'll send a gift to your home," and she gave me clothes she designed. Since living with Sean, Mina has returned home twice, but hasn't met Sean due to scheduling conflicts. She kept saying that I'll definitely meet him someday. We agreed that I would become a homemaker once we had children, but for now, we were both working hard. Recently, however, Sean's behavior changed. He used to always refuse business trips, but now he went on them frequently and started coming home late from drinking. Sometimes he wouldn't come home at all after a night out. When I asked where he stayed, he would only say at a friend's. Thinking about why he started acting this way, I remembered hearing rumors. Rumors were about a woman named Kathy, who started working. Kathy was very cute and seemed like the kind of woman men would want to protect. Perhaps because of this, she wasn't well liked by the female employees. Kathy was known for her numerous rumors involving men. She was close to Sean, and rumors were that Kathy was targeting him. At the time, I thought these were baseless rumors and ignored them. But now that I think about it, Sean started coming home late around the time those rumors began. Feeling uneasy, I was in the lounge when Kathy walked in. It felt awkward, so I decided to leave and then noticed the scent of her perfume. I remembered that Sean had recently bought a similar perfume. Whether it was a coincidence or because of the rumors, I started feeling sick. As I passed by Kathy on my way to the restroom, she laughed at me. That moment turned my suspicions into convictions, but I lacked proof. I decided to gather evidence of Sean's infidelity. The day before Sean said he was going on a business trip, I asked a reliable supervisor at work if Sean was really going. It turned out Sean had taken 3 days off. My supervisor asked, "Isn't Sean's mom unwell? Aren't you taking any time off?" To which I responded with a denial. I hadn't heard about my mother-in-law being sick, and she seemed fine when I last called. After discussing my suspicion that Sean might be cheating with my supervisor, I was given the same days off as Sean. I used those 3 days to follow Sean. When I got home early, Sean asked, "What happened to your car?" I lied that it was having issues, so I borrowed a replacement, and he believed me without question. In reality, anticipating Sean would use the car, I had rented one the day before and left my car at my parents' house. The next day, as expected, Sean left in the car, and I discreetly followed him. He headed to an apartment. I waited in a position where I could see the entrance. Of course, I was ready to take evidence photos with my phone. Sean either had a key or the door was unlocked, as he entered by himself. An hour later, the door opened again, and I saw Sean and Kathy come out. Sean had gone to Kathy's apartment. I was prepared, but seeing the happy couple in front of me, I couldn't hold back my tears. Then they got into the car and drove off, so I followed them. They headed to a jewelry shop. I parked a little far in a parking lot and entered the shop. I had disguised myself just in case, which allowed me to follow them. They were looking at rings, and from eavesdropping, it seemed they were selecting an engagement ring. Sean, already married, what was he thinking? I was irritated. They chose an expensive-looking diamond ring. Afterward, they went to a fancy French restaurant. I couldn't enter as I didn't have a reservation, but managed to capture them arm in arm entering the restaurant. I waited for them to come out and continued following. They returned to Kathy's apartment and didn't come out until morning, so I stayed at a nearby hotel. The next morning, I was on standby early but only saw them leave the house once. They came out together, holding hands, and went to the nearby store, then quickly returned home. On the third day, they hardly left the house except for brief trips to the store, but I managed to take quite a few photos. Still feeling it wasn't enough, I hired a detective agency. A few weeks later, the results from the agency arrived, and all that was left was to bring up the divorce. As I was wondering how to bring up the topic, Sean returned home from his so-called business trip, which was actually an affair. I told him as soon as he got back, we need to talk later. I just got home, you know? I can't talk now. I was about to go to sleep. What about dinner and a shower? I have already done them. You know, talking to you just irritates me. Can you only talk to me when I'm in a good mood? Margot, you've really aged. You don't even bother with makeup at home, it's like you've given up being a woman. Laughing, Sean returned to his bedroom. I was irritated. Everyone ages, and it's okay to be without makeup at home. Besides, how was I supposed to know when he was in a good mood? For now, I decided to drop the divorce talk, take a shower, and go to bed. The next day, after finishing work on time, I hoped I could finally have the conversation. To my surprise, Sean came home much earlier than usual. The heavy footsteps in the hallway and the unusual air about him made me uneasy. The next moment, he burst into the living room. I'm going to live with her, so get out. I was stunned by Sean's sudden loud declaration. Behind Sean, I saw Kathy smirking mischievously. Probably, Kathy had convinced Sean to act this way. Trying to stay calm, I asked Sean for a reason. Why? What happened all of a sudden? Kathy, she only has 6 months to live. I want to spend as much time as possible with her, to create memories. She said she always wanted to live in a house like this. So, Margot, you need to leave. Kathy stuck out her tongue from behind Sean. I was infuriated by her actions, but then got an idea for a satisfying revenge. Telling them to wait, I went to the bedroom to get something I had prepared. When I returned to the living room, they looked puzzled. I said, fine, thinking this isn't my house anyway. Great, Sean. Sorry, Margot, for taking your husband. It's okay, it's okay. So, Sean, can you sign this right away? I said, handing him the divorce papers, and Sean looked a bit bewildered. However, Kathy urged him, saying hurry up and sign it, and Sean reluctantly signed the divorce papers. After confirming the signature, I showed them the compensation agreement prepared by my lawyer. They were shocked. Sean asked, why did you prepare this? But I was ready for divorce anyway, so it was only natural. I demanded $60,000 from Sean. Sean agreed to the amount. Kathy was clearly unhappy. I only have 6 months to live, and you're demanding compensation from a poor girl like me? You're a monster! Poor girl? Okay, let's do this. If you're still alive after 6 months, then I'll demand the compensation then, and it'll be $1 million. How about that? I made a bold proposal to Kathy. Later on, I requested the lawyer to proceed with our divorce. I was profoundly grateful that I had recorded the conversation about the divorce on my cell phone for evidence. After all, evidence is crucial. Since I'm off tomorrow, I'll pack up and leave the day after tomorrow. Oh, and don't worry, I'll file the divorce papers right after this. So, this meeting is over now. Hurry up and leave, I said, concluding the discussion. Sean and Kathy left hand in hand, looking cozy together. I started packing as soon as I got home and called my sister Mina. She found my strategy amusing and said, "That sounds interesting." I always knew she was a great sister. Mina was planning to return from abroad in 6 months, so we decided to carry out the revenge then. The next day at work, everyone was talking about us. The rumor was that Kathy had finally snatched a married man. Unable to bear their sympathetic glances, I went to another room to get some materials for the day. When I opened the door and turned on the light, there was Sean and Kathy. Kathy was clinging to Sean, and they froze when they saw me. I quickly took a photo with my cell phone and left the room. Then, I rushed to report the incident to my supervisor and showed the photo. My supervisor was furious, knowing about the affair. Soon after, the two of them were called to the president's office with me. As I told everything, Sean tried to explain away the incident in the room as a misunderstanding. However, the company had recently installed cameras in each room that could capture clear footage even in the dark, and of course, there was footage from the room. With no way out, Sean faced a cancellation of raise. Kathy couldn't renew her contract. Sean, unable to bear the scrutiny, resigned voluntarily. Finally, I could return to a peaceful life. 6 months later, I was at the airport to pick up Mina. We reunited and chatted on our way back to my former home. Mina used her key to enter the house. As we walked in, I stayed behind Mina, recording everything.
You! What are you doing entering someone else's house?
This is my house, though? I joined in.
Hey there. Marco?
Yes, this is my sister's house. Didn't you know? Indeed, the house belonged to my sister Mina. I had been living there at Mina's request to take care of it while she was away. That's why I reported to Mina when I started living with Sean, and she gave her permission. Moreover, the utility bills were automatically paid from Mina's account. It was a thoughtful arrangement Mina made for my convenience. Had Sean not realized he hadn't been paying for utilities all this time? Normally, I think they'd notice right away, but maybe they're just daydreaming. Even so, Kathy had been living alone, so she should have known about utilities. But the fact that she didn't realize it is beyond surprising. It's actually hilarious.
I brought a copy of the half-year statement since you and Margot divorced. Wonder how much it adds up to. Let's see, including the alimony, the amount to buy this house would be $500,000, right?
Sean is shocked looking at the statement. Hearing our voices, Kathy comes out of the bedroom.
Why are you here? And who is that woman?
Oh, this is my sister Mina. Besides, it's Mina's house, so it's not odd for the owner to be here, right? You look well, that's good. Now you can pay the money. As I say that, Kathy mutters "oh no" under her breath. Sean says, I don't have such a large sum as $500,000. Then, should I sue you for trespassing? I pretend to call the police. Sean hastily says he'll figure something out. Just then, the doorbell rings. It seems the lawyer I called has arrived.
Since we're here, let's have a detailed discussion with the lawyer present.
The lawyer who helped me during my divorce seemed to have a good grasp of the situation. When the lawyer handed Sean the official documents, he visibly slumped in disappointment. Kathy starts to get angry again.
I didn't know this wasn't Sean's house. I was told it was his, so I just lived here.
Well, it doesn't really matter. Let's have Sean pay up. Kathy was making a fuss, saying she made no such promise and there's no proof, and that $60,000 is too much. So, I played the recording of our conversation from 6 months ago. See, there's your proof, I say, and she can't say anything back. Sean suddenly realizes something.
By the way, Kathy, you mentioned earlier about having only 6 months to live. What's that about?
Kathy tries to change the subject.
Okay. We'll pay, just leave.
With that, we quickly leave. Sean ends up buying the house from Mina, but considering the amount, he decides to sell it instead. About a month later, Sean visited my parents' house. I hesitate but decide to open the door, thinking it could be interesting.
Glad you're home. I wanted to talk to Margot. Is that okay?
Sure. If it's here, that's fine. Make it quick. So, what's up? Sean's story boils down to him claiming he was deceived and wasn't in the wrong. He initially refused Kathy's advances but ended up getting involved with her after going out for drinks just once. He said the relationship just kind of dragged on from there and he felt powerless to stop it. I see, so you couldn't help it. Poor you.
You understand, Margot?
No, I don't. People who really couldn't help it wouldn't act like this. I showed him the photos I took when I followed him. Sean falls silent. After a while, Sean starts talking again, as if remembering something.
Right, I didn't want a divorce. It was Kathy's fault, that was the part one couldn't help.
I ask why he didn't want to divorce, and Sean starts explaining. Kathy was a cute affair partner. It seems she had a terminal illness with only 6 months to live and was going to leave Sean. So, Sean's plan was to not divorce and spend those 6 months with Kathy, then come back to me. Hearing this gave me the creeps. I seriously wondered if a few screws were loose in his head. Then, unexpectedly, Kathy, who shouldn't know where my parents' house is, showed up.
Sean. I knew you'd be here with this woman. I've got a GPS app, so finding this place was easy. What do you think you're doing, running away from me? Do you realize what's gonna happen?
Apparently, Sean had fled to my place to escape from Kathy. He tried to run away after finding out her terminal illness was a lie, but Kathy was clingy and wouldn't let him go. He came to me crying about it. Seeing this, Kathy flew into a rage and, for some reason, grabbed my arm and started complaining.
It's all your fault. You're the one who demanded alimony and schemed about the house. It's creepy how you're trying to take my man too. You've messed up my life.
How about not passing the buck? Weren't you and Sean the ones who hurt me first? If that's the case, you can't complain about getting a taste of your own medicine, right? You hurt my life, so it's only fair. Kathy's tone got nastier as she heated up. In the middle of our argument, Sean stepped in to stop us.
Stop fighting over me.
No, we're not. What are you misunderstanding? Even if asked, I wouldn't want a guy like you. If you two would just leave and stop bothering me. Sean looked stunned at my words. He probably thought I was still hung up on him. The thought of how delusional he was made me want to laugh. I was so tired of all this that I said I would call the police, and they left as if running away. I thought I'd avoid any further involvement, but Sean was stubborn. The next day, after work, there was Sean with a bouquet of flowers in front of my office. Why are you here?
Margot! Marry me again!
He shouted so loudly that everyone gathered around. I was so embarrassed I felt like my face was on fire. I tried to ignore him and leave, but Sean grabbed my arm and held me back.
I said it was impossible yesterday. Did you forget already? I'm amazed. Don't do this. I mean, I told you not to bother me ever again.
Sean didn't seem to give up, and he kept holding my arm. Just then, someone pulled him away from me. It was Mina. I secretly came back here, and I thought I'd surprise you by picking you up from work, but I'm really glad I came back. Mina? Oh, Mina, I've fallen for you. I don't need Margot. I want you. So, marry me. I'll follow you anywhere, even overseas. Sean said, holding both of Mina's hands. Everyone around, including me and Mina, were taken aback by Sean's actions. Mina said it hurt, but Sean didn't let go of her hands. I instinctively shouted, dangerous. But it was too late. Mina suddenly flipped Sean over her shoulder. I hadn't mentioned it, but Mina used to train. Her sharp movements were still impressive. I was admiring them, thinking how dangerous she looked when her expression changed. That's when the police, alerted by the commotion, showed up. They seemed confused by the scene of a man down and a woman standing. Anyway, Sean was taken away by the police. That's when Sean finally shouted his true feelings. I don't care whether it's Margot or Mina. I just need someone to pay off my debts for me. Even after selling the house, there's still a debt of $400,000. I don't know what to do. I'll take anyone who'll pay it off for me. Please. As Sean was led away, Mina and I watched him go with cold eyes. The onlookers were saying things like, "That's just wrong, too much, and that lady is so cool." To ensure such an incident never happened again, Mina and I went to the police to request a restraining order. During Mina's stay, we decided to move out of my parents' house and into a high-security condo. Kathy, realizing that Sean had publicly proposed to me and not her, decided to leave him. That made sense. Why stay with a cheating man who doesn't value you, especially with nearly $400,000 in debt remaining? Kathy seemed to have woken up to reality, but she hadn't learned her lesson. She didn't want to work and was looking for a wealthy person to marry and dump the debt on. She even persistently pursued a married wealthy man in town despite being rejected. Eventually, his wife found out and had a restraining order issued against Kathy. Undeterred, Kathy's attempts became more aggressive. She even broke into a house through a window and tried to steal valuables, only to be caught when the security company arrived. Kathy ended up being taken care of by the police for a while. As for Sean, after pulling off such a stunt, he couldn't stay in the area and went back to his hometown, only to be disowned by his parents. His relatives, knowing the situation, also cut ties with him, and eventually, his friends did the same after he asked them for money. Left alone, Sean started working in a factory. He is living there but still trapped in a mountain of debt. He occasionally called me with an anonymous number, so I recently got a new phone. Now, I can finally enjoy some peace in my daily life. Since then, life has been truly peaceful, and I've even found someone I like at work. Mina is still thriving overseas, and although she only comes back occasionally, we sisters are as close as ever. I love my cool and reliable sister Mina so much. She's my pride and joy. I hope we can continue to get along without fighting, and maintain a good relationship. Stranger stuff is trash. If you don't like it, get out. Tim grinned wickedly, his face lit by the flames. What's burning before him are children's toys and clothes. They're keepsakes of my son, John. These memories, more precious to me than my life, were being burned in our yard by Tim, almost as if to taunt me. Dark emotions surged within me. Anger and hatred. I won't forgive him. For hurting John, for making a mockery of his death. For my mother-in-law who stole precious time from John. I'll have my revenge. It doesn't matter what happens now. With nothing left to protect, I am invincible. I'll use everything I have to drag both of them to hell. Telling me to leave the house? That was my plan all along. Sure. I answered with a wide smile. It was about 2 weeks after John's passing. I got a call. It was from Tim. I ignored all his calls, as he was a stranger to me now. But as the calls kept coming for a month or two, I suspected something might have happened to them. With a bit of anticipation, I finally picked up. "What's up, Tim?" "Please, help me!" Tim screamed in a frantic voice. "Mom, she's in trouble!" I smiled faintly. "My name is Michelle. I'm a 33-year-old stay-at-home mom. I'm home." My son John came home carrying his backpack with me. "Welcome back, John. There's pudding in the fridge, you can have one." "What? Just one?" John is 8 years old but still very much a child and a mama's boy. "The rest is for Grandma to eat. Everyone gets one." Darn, before we moved, they were all mine. Wish we never came to this house. Just as I was about to silence John, a shrill voice rang out from behind.
Michelle, you haven't finished cleaning yet. John, you're supposed to study in your room when you get home. Hurry up.
We froze as my mother-in-law clicked her tongue.
Honestly, that's why I was against marrying a divorced woman. And bringing such a poorly raised child too.
She went on with her sarcastic remarks towards John and me. I'm divorced, with an ex-husband. John is the child from that marriage. We divorced when John was 3. Due to my ex's infidelity. Since then, I have raised John alone. I worked tirelessly, day and night, for our life together and for John's future. I thought I could handle it because I was young. But then, like a tightly stretched thread snapping, I collapsed. The reason was overwork. I deeply regretted it and felt despair. What should I do now? Work for a living, collapse, then work again. Was this going to be a never-ending cycle? That's when my current husband, Tim, appeared. I met Tim in the hospital where I was admitted. I was shopping with John at the hospital store, and John was throwing a tantrum, wanting to buy some candy. That's when Tim showed up and said, "I'll buy it for you. Which candy do you want?" I tried to stop him, but Tim insisted just this once and bought John the candy. Tim was visiting a friend in the hospital, and on his way back, he happened to stop by the store. I really love kids. I enjoy their playful and joyful moments, but even when they complain or throw tantrums, I find it adorable. I can't help but spoil them. Tim, a seemingly kind man, had completely won over John, who had received candy from him.
Let's meet again.
By chance, the next time John visited the hospital, we ran into Tim again at the store. Once more, Tim bought candy for John. After such occurrences repeated, I naturally began to trust Tim. What mother wouldn't feel positive about someone who shows affection to her child? Then, one day, John said,
"Hey, can you become my dad? Mom and I are struggling with money."
John must have seen Tim, who always bought him candy, as some kind of wealthy hero. I scolded John for his impolite remark, but when I saw Tim smiling calmly at the scene, I found myself noticing him for the first time. A year later, I married Tim. He was 10 years older, but that brought a sense of maturity and security. The surprise was that Tim was actually wealthy. He was an executive in a company started by his grandfather and a candidate for the next president. The company was one of the top manufacturers. I, a divorced woman, had landed in a cushy position. Tim's relatives, especially his mother, seemed to view me in that light. Today, our family began living with my mother-in-law. The reason was Tim's promotion to president following his father's passing. My mother-in-law suggested we support Tim together. There was another reason. She wanted to teach John, the future company successor, various things. Seeing the grand, old mansion, my heart raced with the thought of living there.
Hey, don't just stand there. Michelle, you clean. John, you study. Get to it.
Clapping her hands, my mother-in-law overwhelmed me with anxiety about our future life. At 4 a.m., I was in the kitchen. Last night, my mother-in-law had sternly told me to prepare breakfast at this time. After finishing, I woke her up. Rubbing her sleepy eyes, she came to the kitchen. "How is it?" I asked, presenting the breakfast I made. She crossed her arms and sighed at the sight. "I can't believe it. A cake for breakfast? That's unheard of in this house. You went out of your way to buy it?" I peered at my irritated mother-in-law. "Would you have preferred something else?" "It's not about preference, the staple food is bread, right? That's the basics." She looked at me sharply. "I'm sorry."
Young people these days, always watching TV and getting brainwashed. Read a book, you'll become ignorant otherwise.
"Thank you for teaching me. From now on, I'll prepare bread. Playing nice won't help." She pointed at the breakfast. "Remake this, now."
What?
I was stunned, and she smirked. "You should be grateful. There's still plenty of time before Tim and John wake up." "Grateful for the time?" I hesitated, then asked.
So, you're saying you gave me time to remake the breakfast?
Exactly.
It's obvious for a commoner and a divorcee like you.
She nodded proudly. She had deliberately set the time, expecting me to redo the breakfast.
And the cake, eggs, and salad for 4, you eat it.
Don't waste food.
What?
She clapped her hands in front of me, impatient at my lack of response.
Hurry up.
I shrank back as she yelled in my ear.
The wife in this house needs to support the family and the employees. I'm teaching you how to do that. Open the fridge and start cooking. I'll make you redo it until you get a suitable breakfast ready.
She screamed in my ear. Overwhelmed by my mother-in-law's outburst, I quickly opened the fridge and started cooking. I haven't had a proper conversation with John lately. He has tutoring after returning home, all arranged by my mother-in-law for his future role in the company. John had no time to play with friends, eat snacks, or relax at home. I repeatedly pleaded with my mother-in-law to give him some free time, but she never listened. One day, while I was cooking dinner, I received a message from Tim. Yes.
I was wondering if you could do that insider thing.
Insider? Confused by the abrupt word, I tilted my head.
Mistake! Delete that message!
Tim's panic gave me an uneasy feeling. Deleted it. I replied to Tim but decided not to delete the message for the time being. The term insider rang a bell, and I planned to do a little research later. That night, when Tim returned home in a great mood, he briskly took me to John's room.
John, how did your test go today?
John was studying with his tutor. He stopped and pulled out a test paper larger than usual from his backpack. Tim, full of expectation, was met by John's gloomy face.
Here.
Tim took the test paper, which had a score of 95 points. Without losing his gentle smile, he crumpled the paper.
John. Yes. 95 points. Well, not bad. For an average person. But you're special. A man with the potential to inherit one of the leading companies. You understand what I mean? Well.
John stumbled over his words. Tim's smile vanished, and his eyes widened in anger.
I told you before. You have to be perfect. Our family does not accept anything less than 100 points. If you can't remember something this important, you don't deserve to be in this family. Sorry.
John trembled. I grabbed Tim's arm and pulled him into the hallway.
Hey, you're going too far. John is your son. Our family, right? Does the family need qualifications?
When I confronted him head-on, Tim looked puzzled.
Huh? That's what family is. Each member is fulfilling their role to protect a house that has lasted for generations. Women must be perfect at household chores. Men must be perfect at work to protect the company. If not, they're not considered family. They're useless to the house. They're strangers. Isn't that obvious?
I was speechless. That's not a family. It's like treating someone as a tool.
I can't take it anymore.
John's scream came from the room. When I rushed in, he was throwing pencils and textbooks at the tutor.
I hate studying. I can't remember all this. I'm a bad kid. Dad hates me too.
John was crying and screaming.
John!
I embraced him.
It's okay now, John. It's all going to be okay.
As I comforted my crying son, I made up my mind. I couldn't stay here any longer. I would get a divorce. I had been preparing for it secretly. Divorce would mean a harder life, working from dawn till dusk. But that was inevitable. I am a mother. For my son, any hardship is worth it. I renewed my resolve. But then, something happened to John. He started feeling weak in the mornings and didn't want to go to school. I thought it was fatigue from studying and let him rest. The doctor said it was anemia due to stress and prescribed iron supplements. However, his weakness didn't improve even after a week or two. I took John to a university hospital. After the examination, the doctor told me, "Your son has leukemia. The weakness and anemia are symptoms, but the local doctor probably didn't suspect it." My mind went blank. "Also, one more thing. Your son has acute leukemia. It progresses quickly, so he needs to be hospitalized immediately for treatment," the doctor said with a grim face. It progresses quickly. I didn't want to think about what those words meant. There was no time for divorce preparations. I informed my mother-in-law and Tim about John's condition and told them I would be by his side. My mother-in-law made a disgusted face. "You know, Michelle, it's pretty obvious that John is going to pass away, right? You should prioritize the household chores for the sake of those of us who will continue living." "Mom is right, Michelle. That's your role." To me, they seemed like inhabitants of a different world. I had decided on divorce. Their opinions no longer mattered to me. I packed mine and John's belongings and left the house. I devoted myself to supporting John during his hospitalization. But despite my efforts, he passed away to heaven just 6 months after being admitted. It was a shockingly abrupt and anticlimactic end. Moments before his last breath, John spoke in a frail voice. "Mom." "What is it, John? What's wrong?" Surrounded by doctors and nurses, John managed a smile, as if a bright future awaited him. "When I get discharged, I want to play a lot. Hang out with friends, play games, eat lots of pudding. Mom, is that okay?" I couldn't stop my tears. "Of course, John." His modest dream remained unfulfilled. I was in a daze after John's death, feeling time pass incredibly quickly. Today, I finished John's funeral. I'm home. Returning to the mansion alone, I smelled something burning. In the yard, I found Tim sitting and burning something. It was John's toys and clothes. His keepsakes. "What are you doing?" I couldn't comprehend the scene before me. "Burning trash," Tim said matter-of-factly. "That's not trash. That's John's stuff." Tim chuckled. "John, huh?" To me, he was a stranger who couldn't fulfill his role in this house. Tim's face was reddened by the flames. His smile was malevolent. "Stranger stuff is trash. If you don't like it, just leave." Seeing his face, I finally understood. Ah, this is his true nature. At the same time, the emotions dulled by John's loss surged within me. Anger and hatred. I won't forgive him. For hurting John, for mocking his death. And my mother-in-law who stole precious time from John. I'll have my revenge. It doesn't matter what happens now. I have nothing left to protect. I'll drag both of them to hell with everything I have. Leave the house? That was my intention from the start. Sure. I answered with a broad smile. I divorced him. He himself handed me the divorce papers. Tim probably had been preparing the divorce papers since he realized John wouldn't behave as he wanted. In the end, John and I were just tools in that house. About 2 weeks after John's passing, I kept talking to his photos every day and steadily prepared for my revenge. That's when Tim called me. I ignored all his calls. He was a stranger to me now. But as the calls continued incessantly for a month or two, I had a hunch that something might have happened to them. With a bit of anticipation, I finally answered the call. "What's up, Tim?" "Please, help me," Tim cried out in a desperate voice. "Mom, she's in a terrible state." I relaxed my mouth, careful not to let my true feelings show. What? What happened? "Recently, Mom started acting weirdly. She couldn't speak clearly, went to the hospital, and..." Tim's voice trembled as he informed me. "Mom had a stroke. She's bedridden now after the treatment, and I'm taking care of her at home. I thought about using a caregiving service, but Mom doesn't want to trouble others. But I'm at my limit. I'm exhausted from work, and next week I have a business trip. So..." Tim spoke with a half-hearted voice. can you come back? Even if it's just for a short while, we live together after all. Mom said she's okay with Michelle. I almost laughed at the ridiculousness. My mother-in-law's matter. She probably just wants to use me again. But after a moment, I said, "That's tough. I owe your mother. Now it's my turn to repay the favor." "Thank you, Michelle." Tim sounded like he was crying with joy. I was looking forward to when those tears would turn into tears of sorrow. I returned to Tim's mansion and took care of my bedridden mother-in-law. "Here's your breakfast. Bread, fried eggs, and salad." I pushed the bread into my mother-in-law's mouth. She opened her eyes wide in refusal, but being bedridden, she couldn't resist. "You can't be picky. Even John could eat bread." I forcefully shoved the bread into her mouth. But she never swallowed it, struggling with her mouth full of bread. Tears in her eyes. "Stop it!" "What's that, mother-in-law?" "My brain." She tried to speak with her mouth not working properly. "It's pretty obvious that you're going to die soon." I smiled faintly. My mother-in-law glared at me resentfully. I clapped my hands loudly in front of her. "Hurry up. Swallow what's in your mouth. Don't just sit there." I shouted in her ear. Startled, my mother-in-law spat out the bread. She coughed violently. I picked up the bread from the floor, now covered in dirt, and brought it back to her mouth. "No. You're the one who said it, remember?" I pushed the bread into her mouth again. "You can't waste food." My mother-in-law screamed in a muffled voice. Every day, I fed her. Morning, noon, and night. If she spat out the bread, I put it back in her mouth, and if she spat it out again, back it went. This routine went on for hours. In an environment where no one could help her, my mother-in-law seemed to lose the will to resist, and within a week, she obediently swallowed the meal. She became completely exhausted, now shaking in bed all day. When I appeared, she would let out a scream of fear. A month later, Tim returned from his business trip. As I greeted him at the entrance, his face lit up with a smile upon seeing me. "Thanks, Michelle. It must have been tough taking care of Mom." I smiled warmly. "It's okay. After all, she is the mother of someone I loved. I thought of it as my duty as a former wife." "Michelle! You finally understand." Tim's eyes welled up as he approached me. But I swiftly avoided him and headed to the living room. "Dinner's ready. Your mother's asleep, so let's eat together." "Oh, I'm looking forward to it. Nothing beats coming home to a meal after work." I chuckled at our conversation, almost like that of newlyweds. Just after we said grace, we heard something like a woman's moan. "Oh, looks like your mother woke up." Tim and I went to her room. My mother-in-law opened her mouth wide upon seeing us. "Let her go." "What's wrong, Mom?" Tim leaned close to her bed. "Useless. Get out." She glared at me. Tim frowned. "What are you saying, Mom? Michelle has been taking care of you all this time, right? Look how clean she's kept your room, you should be thankful." "No." I had thoroughly erased all evidence of feeding her. "Listen, Michelle even cooked dinner for me. She did her duty well. But all you do is lie in bed all day, Mom. You're the useless one here." Tears welled up in my mother-in-law's eyes. Frustrated that her intentions couldn't be communicated, she started to scream incoherently. The sound was almost deafening. "Shut up. Be quiet," Tim yelled, red-faced with anger. The two of them started quarreling, and watching this, I quietly smiled behind Tim's back. I left the mansion. While they were arguing, I took the luggage I had packed beforehand and left the house. Of course, Tim called me right away. "Michelle, why did you leave?" I responded with a tearful voice. "But your mother told me to leave. I tried so hard to take care of her." "Look, Mom is emotionally unstable. Please, I can't handle it alone." "I'm sorry, I'm just too tired. I really loved your mother. But to see her change like that, it's too painful for me.
Michelle.
Tim seemed to deeply empathize with my lie. He fell silent, deep in thought. Once I sort things out, I'll come back. Is it okay if I keep the keys?
Oh, of course.
Thank you, Tim. I hung up the phone. Half a year later, I visited Tim's mansion. I brought a large garbage bag with me. I went into my mother-in-law's room and rummaged through her dresser. I put her favorite clothes, jewelry, branded items, and luxury goods into the garbage bag. Once done, I opened all the doors and cabinets in the room, grabbing all the items that held memories of my mother-in-law and Tim, stuffing them into the bag. I carried the heavy bag to the yard, dumped its contents on the ground, and lit it with a lighter from my pocket. The smell of burning filled the air, and the precious memories turned to ash in no time. Suddenly, I heard a noise from the entrance. Michelle? Are you there? Tim's weary voice called out. I met him at the entrance.
Welcome back. Sorry, I'm leaving early. I'm just feeling a bit off.
It's okay. I'm struggling too. I never thought Mom would end up like this. Today was my mother-in-law's funeral. After I left, Tim had been taking care of her, but unable to balance it with his job, he had put her in a facility against her will. She rapidly lost weight and started showing depression-like symptoms. Even when Tim visited, she wouldn't even try to speak. My mother-in-law's last days were spent in a facility bed. One morning, the staff found her already having passed away. The cause was presumed to be a recurrence of her stroke, according to the doctor. I comforted Tim by patting his back.
How about some coffee in the garden for a change of scenery?
Thanks, Michelle. Tim said, looking at me with teary eyes. I took his hand and led him to the garden.
What's the smell, huh?
The moment Tim saw the garden, he was dumbfounded by the sight of his mother's belongings being burned to ashes.
Is that a bonfire? Michelle, what are you doing?
Tim asked, half smiling. I had to enlighten the obtuse Tim. I'm burning trash. You can tell if you look closely. All of this, your mother's keepsakes. I said it as if it was the most natural thing.
Trash? What are you talking about? Those are Mom's precious memories. Why would you do this?
Tim was in a frenzy, to which I feigned surprise.
Why get so heated?
They're just stranger things.
Strangers? Mom was family,
Tim exclaimed, and I tilted my head.
Didn't you say it yourself?
Your mother was useless. If she couldn't fulfill her role in the family, she's a stranger, right? I smiled sweetly. Strangers' belongings are trash. That's why I burned them. Tim lunged at me.
Don't mess around. You can't just burn someone's stuff. That's unforgivable.
Then why don't you save them? Looks like not everything has burned yet. Tim's eyes widened in shock, and he impulsively reached into the fire, likely panicking from the shock. He tried to salvage his mother's keepsakes, but had to retract his hand from the intense heat.
Damn it! Mom's memories, her precious memories.
Tim, with tears and snot running down his face, repeatedly tried to reach into the fire, but to no avail. My mother-in-law's belongings were completely consumed by the flames. Be careful, Tim. I doused the remaining ashes with a bucket full of water to extinguish the fire. Seeing the pitiable remains of my mother-in-law's belongings, Tim collapsed.
Why? Why would you do this? You took care of Mom, cooked for me. Yes, all that to gain your trust. Poor your mother, telling the truth but not being believed by her own son. What? Did you do something to Mom?
I didn't do anything. Just took care of her. She cried with joy when I gave her something to eat. Cool your head. I threw the remaining water in the bucket over Tim's head. Startled, he stumbled and fell to the ground, possibly twisting his ankle as he groaned in pain. His figure was utterly pitiful. Such a foolish family running a company, the employees must be suffering. I bet your father and grandfather in heaven are crying. The company might as well collapse. I threw the bucket at Tim. My revenge isn't over yet. I left the mansion, leaving Tim behind. At my new home, I was watching TV. The morning news was on, the announcer cheerfully reporting the weather and horoscope. Suddenly, a breaking news alert interrupted. Breaking news. The police are. My phone rang. Hello? It was Tim. You did it, didn't you? What are you talking about? I feigned ignorance, and Tim shouted in frustration. The insider trading. That message Tim had mistakenly sent. It was proof of Tim's wrongdoing. Insider trading is a crime where someone with inside information of a company shares it for unfair stock market gains. I sold Tim's message to a weekly magazine. The journalist thoroughly investigated the company and published the truth. The scandal of a well-known company caused a public uproar. And today, the police finally acted. You're the one to blame. Running a company but committing crimes. That's none of your business. Besides, do you even have time to call me? Isn't your company in chaos right now? Aren't the police there? Well, yeah. Tim's words trailed off. And I could somewhat guess the situation. You're running away, aren't you? Tim fell silent. Which was answer enough. I sighed heavily. You said it, didn't you? A man's duty is to do perfect work to protect the company. I laughed through my nose, loud enough for Tim to hear. Well done, Tim. You've done a great job in the end. I sent him my heartfelt congratulations and hung up the phone. Later, I didn't forget to inform the police about Tim's call. Tim was arrested. He had been insider trading regularly, apparently to maintain relationships with business partners. Since Tim became president, the company's reputation with partners had plummeted. As companies began severing ties, Tim resorted to criminal acts to keep the few remaining partners. Who could have imagined such an end for a company that had lasted for generations? Pathetic. That was the only word I could think of. That night, I was planning my next move. It wasn't enough. This wouldn't bring John peace. He wouldn't forgive me. Lost in these thoughts at my desk, I must have fallen asleep. I found myself in a dream. Standing in an empty space, I felt someone hug me tightly from behind. I immediately turned around. John. John looked up at me with a gentle face. I collapsed on the spot. I'm sorry, John. It's all because I remarried. Because I dreamed of a happy life with the three of us. John shook his head in my arms. Mom. He looked straight at me, smiling. Thank you. And with that, I woke up. Tears streaming down my face. Remembering John's face in the dream, I cried my heart out. Time passed. In the morning, I finished getting ready and headed to the entrance. I stared at John's photo propped up there. Accepting John's death wasn't something I could do easily. I heard countless times to move on, to look forward, but none of those words resonated with me. But at least, I wanted to live a life that wouldn't embarrass me in front of John in heaven. And when I see John again, I'll tell him everything I've experienced. The things John couldn't do, the things he wanted to do, I'll experience them for him and tell him all about it. I'm leaving now, John. I left the house with a smile. The sky was clear and blue, and the sun shone brightly. I don't need a kid, my father declared at the funeral, as the rest of the family looked at him in disbelief. I'm getting remarried. This time to a younger and more attractive woman. Right, Michelle? Oh, John, you're so silly. Father embraced a woman named Michelle from among the employees. Michelle looked happy as she clung to my father's arm. Do you even understand the situation right now? What? It's a day to celebrate. My old wife finally kicked the bucket. I glared at my father. Then Maria gently embraced my shoulder. I'll take Sally with me.
I won't pay child support. That's fine.
Maria declared that firmly, hugging me. From that day, I started living with my aunt and her husband. I didn't hear from my father at all, but a month later, he suddenly called.
Hey, help me out. Who is this? It's your father.
My only father is Kent, I said, ending the call and blocking his number. No matter how much he cried or raged, my father's hell had just begun. I'll make sure he regrets it plenty. I'm Sally Manson, a 12-year-old middle schooler. Just a normal girl who loves her mother. Being an only child, I get to do whatever hobbies I like, and I think I have quite a bit of freedom. My mother is very kind and rarely gets angry. But when she does, she's really scary. However, I always think it's my fault for doing something bad. Other than that, we get along very well, often going shopping together on weekends. My real father is a man named John, a very irresponsible person. Even as a child, I wondered why my mother married him. Once, I asked her why. But she just smiled awkwardly and said, "You'll understand when you're older." Honestly, even as a middle schooler, I had no idea why my mother chose him. He was always out having fun, and I have no memories of playing with him. More often, he treated me coldly, and I hated him. But I didn't talk about it much, because it made my mother sad. Still, I had dreams about marriage. That's because my Aunt Maria and her husband were an ideal couple. Maria, my mother's twin sister. She is very kind and sometimes strict, and she dotes on me. She was my aunt, but to me, an only child, she was like a sister. And I adored her husband, Kent, as if he were my brother. They had no children. Apparently, due to an illness Kent had in the past, he couldn't have children. Kent was a childhood friend of my mother and Maria, so Maria knew about his illness and its aftermath. Still, when they decided to marry, my grandparents strongly opposed it, but Maria boldly went ahead with the wedding, my mother told me. So, until I was born, Maria and Kent were estranged from my grandparents. But my birth brought them back together, and now they have a great relationship. However, my father ridiculed Kent. He keeps saying unbearable things like calling him a failure for not being able to have children, or accusing him of marrying for an inheritance. That's why I despised my father and swore never to become an adult like him. Right after I started middle school, my grandparents threw a celebration party. Their house is enormous. They seem to be local landowners with several businesses. My mother, Maria, and Kent each run one of my grandparents' companies. In contrast, my father is just a regular employee in one of their companies. As a child, I found this odd. But seeing my father's behavior, even I, as a child, understood he could never be trusted with a company. Yet, it seemed to bother him a lot. At the party, while pouring a drink for my grandfather, he started talking nonchalantly.
Hey, maybe it's about time you let me run one of the companies, huh? It looks bad, having the wife as the boss and the husband as a low-level employee.
The previously warm atmosphere suddenly turned cold. I sighed and took a bite of my cake. My father, oblivious to the mood, continued.
Or maybe we could just swap positions, right? That would solve everything. Let's not have such vulgar discussions at Sally's entrance celebration, my mother interjected. What, vulgar?
My father yelled, and his voice echoed in the room. Seemingly due to the alcohol, my father appeared unable to control his emotions. In contrast to my calmly speaking mother, my father's aggressiveness was almost comical.
Why do I have to become a regular employee anyway? I took over my current position through proper procedures. That's what I'm saying. Act more like a wife.
His argument made no sense. Just as everyone was starting to realize the conversation was going nowhere, my grandfather spoke up.
If I left it to you, the company would be ruined in no time. What?
My father exclaimed, his face turning red as he fell silent. Finally, the room quieted down, and my grandfather's calm voice filled the space.
After all, you haven't forgotten that you're in this position because of the disrespect you showed to an important client, have you?
This time, my father turned pale and stepped back. My grandfather began to slowly tell the story, as if speaking to my father. The company where my father works was originally supposed to be his as the president. But before the announcement of his appointment, he had an affair with the daughter of the president of the most important client. When the client's president found out, he stormed in. Because of that, the client threatened to stop all transactions, almost driving the company to bankruptcy. Hearing this, I felt embarrassed and pitiful for my father.
But that was 10 years ago. It's past the statute of limitations, right? It's not for you to decide the statute of limitations.
My mother interjected, cutting off his argument. My father glared at her in frustration. Then, clicking his tongue, he downed his drink in one gulp and left the room.
Sorry for spoiling the celebration. No, it's my father who should be sorry.
My grandfather shook his head and patted my head. Since my father had left, we restarted the celebration without him. I received an electronic dictionary from my grandparents, a book voucher from my mother, and the sneakers I wanted from Maria and Kent. I was in high spirits. When my mother and I got home, my father had already returned. Seeing the shopping bag I was holding, he clicked his tongue loudly.
Lucky you, getting everything you want. It's a gift, it's only natural. Yeah, my bad.
He apologized insincerely and went into his study. His attitude dampened my spirits, but the gifts still made me happy that night. Later, Maria and Kent invited me on a summer vacation trip. It seemed they were going abroad and thought it would be nice to take me along. My mother, having a business trip during that period, happily agreed to let me go. I thought my father would be displeased, but surprisingly, he was positive about it.
Hey, that's great. Have a nice trip. I won't be here either, I've got a business trip.
It turned out he had a business trip during the same period. I was braced for a snide remark or two, so this caught me off guard. Despite always complaining about work, my father was cheerfully preparing for his trip. It felt odd, but I was too excited about my trip to dwell on it. On the trip, I had a wonderful time with Maria and Kent. Beautiful scenery, delicious food. It was a luxurious vacation.
Sally, is there anywhere you want to go? How about shopping together tomorrow, just the two of us? Really? I'd love to. But what about Kent?
When I looked at Kent, he smiled and nodded. I was so happy I hugged Maria. Then Maria hugged me back.
You're always such a sweetheart, no matter how old you get, Sally. I'm not a baby, I'm in middle school.
Sorry, Maria said, still smiling. The next day, as planned, we went shopping. Kent had something he wanted to do and left the room earlier than us.
Wow. This is amazing. This one's cute too.
Maria and I were excitedly chatting and laughing in the store. Once our hands were full with shopping bags, we sat at a terrace to have some tea. While enjoying delicious cake, we were having a great time talking, but suddenly Maria fell silent and stared at one spot.
What's wrong, Maria? Oh no!
I followed her gaze and couldn't help but exclaim. There was my father with a young woman, both wearing frivolous aloha shirts, getting cozy with each other.
That man. Wait, Maria. It's okay, all right?
Maria looked like she was about to explode in anger, but I managed to calm her down. This wasn't the first time my father had an affair. It had been happening since I was little. At the worst times, he would even take me along to meet his mistresses. I loved my mother dearly, so of course, I was furious with him, and after that, he stopped taking me along. With such a history, my feelings towards my father's infidelity were just a resigned acceptance.
We should tell Mom. For now, just ignore it. Sally! Yes, you're right. Let's just take a picture and send it to her, Maria said, taking a photo to send to my mom.
I was curious about how my mom would react, but I assumed it would end with her dropping the hammer on him, as usual. However, just before we were due to return home, I received a call from my grandmother with unbelievable news. Sally, calm down and listen. Your mother, she died in an accident.
What? I was so shocked that I dropped the phone. Maria picked it up and, after hearing the same thing from my grandmother, broke down in tears. Kent took over the call, but both Maria and I could do nothing but cry. We returned home and went straight to the hospital where my mother was taken. The moment I saw her there, I burst into tears. Mom, Mom! This can't be! Maria collapsed in shock. Kent accompanied her to another room while I stayed and listened to my grandparents explain. My mom had jumped in to save a child who dashed into the street, becoming a human shield. She was hit by a car and severely injured on the asphalt, and by the time she reached the hospital, it was too late. The child only had minor injuries and was otherwise unharmed. I just stood there, numb, listening to the story. By the way, where's John? We can't get a hold of him. Hearing my grandparents, I mentioned that my father was abroad and also told them about the woman he was with. My grandfather was furious. Finally, we managed to contact my father 2 days after my mother's death, just as the funeral was about to start. Dying to save a kid, what a foolish thing to do. How can you say that? But that's the truth, right? My father said unapologetically, and everyone, including me, glared at him. Unperturbed by our stares, he casually took his seat as the chief mourner. You're not supposed to sit there. Huh? I'm the chief mourner, my grandfather said, and my father, looking displeased, moved from the chief mourner's seat to sit behind it. It was after the funeral. My father suddenly stood up, went to my mother's side, and, unbelievably, threw his wedding ring at her. What? What are you doing? Well, it's over between us now, right? No need to pretend anymore, he said and burst into loud laughter. Now I'm free. Then, pointing at me with a half-smile, he boldly declared, I don't need a child. At the funeral, everyone else looked at my father with disbelief, as if they couldn't believe what he just said. I'm getting remarried. This time to a younger and more beautiful woman. Right, Michelle? Oh, John, you always say the funniest things. My father called out to a woman named Michelle from the crowd of employees and embraced her. Michelle, looking pleased, clung to my father's arm. Do you even realize what's happening here? What? It's a day to celebrate. My old wife finally kicked the bucket. I glared at my father. Then, Maria gently hugged my shoulder. Sally will come with me. I won't pay child support. That's fine. Maria declared that firmly, holding me tight. From that day, I started living with my aunt and her husband. There was no contact from my father, but a month later, he suddenly called. Hey, help me out! Who is this? It's your dad! My only father is Kent, I said, then hung up and blocked his number. No matter how much he cried or pleaded, my father's hell had just begun. I'll make sure he regrets everything. After I blocked him, my father seemed to have called various relatives. But none of the relatives who knew about what happened at the funeral wanted anything to do with him. He was blocked by everyone he called, and finally, he showed up at my grandfather's company. I happened to be there delivering something I forgot, so I listened in disbelief to my father shouting outside the CEO's office. It was just a momentary lapse in judgment. So, you're the kind of man who, in a momentary lapse, throws a ring at your deceased wife. After my grandfather's words, there was a moment of silence behind the door. He was probably trying to think of an excuse. And just as I thought, he came up with one. I was just confused. I didn't mean any harm. I was upset because I loved her. I can't believe this. I couldn't help but express my disbelief at such a far-fetched explanation, and my father, with his sharp hearing, caught my voice. Hey, Sally! Are you there? Tell your grandpa that I loved your mom. Loved her? I was so angry I felt like I might faint. My grandfather patted my shoulder and nodded at me. I took a deep breath and then replied to my father. Grandpa, everything he says is a lie. He never loved Mom or me. Are you kidding me? Come out here.
My father was yelling and banging on the door from the other side. But his actions couldn't stop me from speaking the truth.
He always cheated, making Mom sad, and he never said anything nice to me. He's not a father.
My words made my father even angrier. Finally, he kicked the door.
Who do you think raised you all these years? If you're going to talk like that, pay back all the education expenses right now.
At that moment, I realized all he cared about was money. Actually, my mom left a will. In it, she wrote that my father wouldn't get any inheritance as compensation for his infidelity.
You say pay back, but you never contributed to living expenses, did you? It's all written in the will. You shouldn't have meddled.
My father spat out those words resentfully. His selfishness gave me a headache. Then he said something even more unbelievable.
I'm not divorcing her. So, as the parent of a minor, I should manage her money, right? Huh.
I was completely astounded. It was my father who said he wanted a divorce, and the divorce papers had already been processed. In other words, their divorce was final.
What are you talking about? Shut up! Children should not interfere. I'll tell the office that the documents we submitted were a mistake.
He didn't realize that once documents are accepted by the office, they can't just be withdrawn unilaterally. Even as a middle schooler, I understood this. Why couldn't my father?
You're just a stranger now. The office won't accept such a one-sided request. No, we loved each other. I'm sure it'll be fine.
His overconfident words made both me and my grandfather look at each other and laugh. We could feel my father getting more irritated from behind the door.
What, you're making fun of me? Hey, don't you know? Mom wanted a divorce. What? She did?
My father's voice sounded utterly dumbfounded, like a bolt from the blue. I decided to give him an answer.
You know, we went on a trip overseas, to the same place as you, Dad. It was a coincidence. But when I told Mom, she said she wanted a divorce.
There was sudden silence on the other side of the door. Then I heard sniffling. It seemed my father truly believed Mom would never divorce him, and the shock made him break down in tears.
Why a divorce? She loved me, even forgave my infidelities. Why? Maybe she reached her limit of endurance?
My pinpoint words made him cry even more, audible even through the door. Yet, I couldn't feel any sympathy for him.
Anyway, it's time for you to leave. What? Wait. Hey, what are you doing? Let go of me.
It seemed like the security guards had arrived, and after a few moments of scuffle, the other side of the door quieted down. Grandpa and I sat down, taking a breath. What did my daughter see in that man?
I've been wondering the same.
We sighed and looked at each other, then started laughing. After a good laugh, Grandpa called the company lawyer and headed to the police station. Dad was issued a restraining order against us, complaining all the while, but he couldn't stand up to the police and eventually accepted it. Then, a few days of quiet returned. I missed Mom terribly, but having Maria around helped distract me a bit.
Sally, let's go shopping. Okay.
We had moved into Maria's house, so we went to a nearby department store to buy some essentials. From a distance, a disheveled man approached.
Eek! Dad?
I yelled out as he suddenly grabbed my arm. His hair was unkempt, and he was dressed in dirty clothes. It was my father. With bloodshot eyes, he begged.
Come on, $20,000, no, $2,000 will do. Give me some money. We're family, right?
I forcefully shook off his hand. He fell on his rear but quickly clung to my leg.
Let go of me. Give me the money. Give it to me.
My father, in his half-crazed state, lacked any of the cleanliness he had when we lived together. His shirt was filthy with mud stains, and he seemed like he hadn't bathed in days.
I haven't eaten in 2 days. I want to bathe and eat. Please. No way. Why don't you go to that woman?
As I dismissed him, my father, crying, responded.
Don't say that. She ran off with a younger guy when she found out I had no money. I've been kicked out of the house and have nowhere to go.
I almost blurted out serves you right, but managed to restrain myself. Beside me, Maria was shaking with anger.
How dare you say that? After you cheated with another woman and abandoned Sally. I'm truly sorry. I didn't mean any harm. That makes it even worse.
Maria's face was red with anger and tears. Holding her hand tightly, I spoke to my father.
I've been legally adopted. Maria is now officially my mom. So, we're strangers now. My father is Kent. Adopted?
My father was stunned, his eyes wide open. He had abandoned his middle school daughter. It should have been easy to predict. I despised my father for not understanding even such simple things.
If you're adopted, then the inheritance won't come to me.
Well, there was nothing for you in the first place. Be thankful you're not being charged alimony. I spoke plainly, and my father's face wrinkled in anger.
You. That's disrespectful to your father. I'm the reason you were born. You should be grateful and devoted to me.
Finally, my father's true colors showed as he yelled, causing a stir among the bystanders. I looked down on him with cold eyes. And I voiced my true feelings.
No money from me, all the cheating, and above all, making Mom sad. I called you Dad for Mom's sake, but I never thought of you as my father. Not then, not now.
I had never been so direct before, and my father looked up at me, dumbfounded.
Also, there's a restraining order against you. Please abide by it. Goodbye. Sally.
He reached out his hand, but I ignored him and entered the department store with Maria. My father was apprehended by security as he followed. Maria and I finally relaxed as we watched. The police took my father away, and he kept mentioning my name. Despite the restraining order, he still expected me to come for him. Maria was furious and arranged for a lawyer, while Kent discussed something with her. I asked about it, but they wouldn't tell me.
It's only natural as your parents, we're eager to handle it. You'll understand soon, don't worry, Kent reassured me.
A few days later, we went to my grandparents' house for a discussion, accompanied by Maria and Kent. Upon entering the living room, there were my father, looking completely worn out, and Michelle, who had been by his side during my mother's funeral. When they noticed me, both of them had frightened expressions and were trembling nervously.
Let's start the discussion,
my grandfather announced, and the atmosphere tensed up. The lawyer slowly read out the main purpose of today's meeting. Originally, as per my mother's will, there was no claim for alimony against my father, but also no inheritance for him. However, due to numerous nuisances, we decided to claim damages for the trouble caused, not just alimony for the affair. And for Michelle, who was the affair partner, we're going to claim alimony. That was what the lawyer read out. Both my father and Michelle turned pale upon hearing this.
Also, as an additional point, John and Michelle have been asked to resign from our company. Can't you reconsider?
Michelle pleaded, standing up in desperation. Grandfather's eyes were cold as he watched her. But she persisted.
Look, the alimony. I won't be able to pay it if I'm unemployed, right? That would be problematic, wouldn't it? So firing me isn't a wise decision.
Michelle spoke as if she had come up with a clever plan. However, grandfather's expression remained stern. Realizing this, Michelle started to stammer out excuses.
It was all John's idea. I couldn't refuse my boss's advances. It was against my will. What? You're the one who came on to me.
My father retorted as Michelle began to sob dramatically. Their shouting quickly filled the living room.
Silence!
Grandfather's stern voice brought their argument to a halt. The lawyer then spread out documents in front of them.
Here are the documents for the nuisance and alimony fees. Please read and sign. We can't pay this amount. That's not for you to decide.
After being curtly dismissed, Michelle reluctantly signed. Once she signed, she was escorted out of the room. However, my father kept his head down, refusing to sign. Maria's irritation was becoming apparent. Then Kent spoke up quietly.
Infidelity is the lowest, isn't it? What are you talking about all of a sudden? Betrayal, you know? Did you know it's a crime in some places abroad?
My father's face went pale upon hearing this. Kent continued, his expression impassive.
You promised at the wedding to support each other in sickness and health, right? Was breaking that vow and hurting your partner fun?
My father opened and closed his mouth but seemed unable to speak against Kent's intensity.
The woman you married was the sister of the woman I loved, the mother of my precious daughter, and my cherished childhood friend.
Well. Kent looked straight at my father with a smile and then slowly delivered his final words.
I will never forgive you.
Throughout, Kent didn't raise his voice but spoke gently, as if guiding my father. It seemed to affect my father more than any shouting would have. With a pale face, my father just stared at Kent, frozen. Kent gently put a pen in my father's hand.
You can sign now, right?
Yes. My father seemed smaller than ever, even more so than when Mom was alive. After signing, my father left without looking at us, staggering out of the room. Later, I heard that he had taken out a loan to pay the nuisance fee. Kent is managing that money. It seems my father borrowed from a very dangerous place and soon disappeared without a trace. He might even be working on some fishing boat somewhere. As harsh as it may seem, I feel no sympathy for him. He brought it upon himself. In fact, I find myself hoping that the company he owes money to squeezes even more out of him. As for Michelle, after paying alimony for being involved with a married man and being forced to resign, her parents found out and she was sent back to the countryside. There, she was married off to a man 30 years her senior in the village and now leads a busy life with no rest, taking care of her mother-in-law and doing farm work. Apparently, that family had been looking for a young wife to take care of their elderly for some time. I heard that Michelle's parents harshly scolded her when she complained about wanting to escape. Maria and Kent, as my parents, shower me with love every day. They treat me like their real daughter, sometimes strictly scolding me. On the monthly anniversary of my mother's death, we visit her grave, eat her favorite foods, visit places she loved, and spend time remembering her. Watching the love between Maria and Kent makes me hope to have such a wonderful marriage when I grow up. My relationship with my grandparents is also great. Lately, they're considering building a vacation home for my overseas studies, which I'm desperately trying to dissuade them from. I do want to study abroad, but I'm just a first-year middle school student. Right now, I want to enjoy time with my friends in Japan, which I've told my grandparents. Though they are nearly 80, they're still very energetic, traveling often. Their wedding anniversary is approaching, so I'm trying to decide what to give them. Recently, a proposal I made in the student council was approved, so I've been busy every day. There are still many decisions to be made and problems to be solved. But it's a fulfilling job, and I enjoy discussing things at school the most. At home, I've recently become engrossed in reading English books. Maria gave me a book that my mother loved, and I'm slowly translating it with an electronic dictionary. It's not smooth sailing yet, but I find the translation work so enjoyable that I'm considering becoming a translator in the future. To achieve this, I've asked Maria to enroll me in a school where I can learn English conversation and comprehension. The separation from my mother is still very sad, and I often cry when I think of her, but I'm loved by many people and living in the present. Someday, when I go to heaven, I want to tell her all about it, which is why I've started keeping a diary. I plan to write about both successes and failures for my mother to hear about them. Maria and Kent have told me that it's okay not to forget my mother and not to force myself to call them mom and dad. But to me, they are like a second set of parents. So, for their upcoming anniversary, I've prepared a gift with a card that says, "Happy Anniversary, Mom and Dad." I'm excited, thinking they'll surely be happy. Every morning, the first thing I do is talk to my mother's photo. It's my daily routine. The sky outside is clear and blue. Maybe my mother is cheering me on. Thinking that makes me happy. To my worthless daughter, live on your own from now. Is this a joke? What does this mean? Returning from school, Jessica found her house completely empty, with only a note left behind. Are you trying to tell me that I am no longer needed? Ever since I was young, my parents only doted on my beautiful older sister, but I never imagined they would abandon me like this. Struggling to hold back my tears, I headed to my grandmother's place.
I wish I had never been born.
Don't say such things. They made the foolish choice to abandon you. They will regret it. My grandmother accepted me, and from then on, we lived together until I became an adult.
Hey! We're here to pick you up.
In the evening, when I expected just a regular visitor, it turned out to be my parents who had abandoned me. I was infuriated, but for some reason, Grandma let them into the house. What do you mean? As I was thinking this, my parents started to say something outrageous. My name is Jessica and I am an IT engineer currently living with my grandmother. I enjoy living with my grandmother every day and my work is going well. Although I have nothing to complain about, a turning point in my life came about 5 years ago. Before that, however, he had led a life that was not a happy one. Mom, I want a new game for my birthday. Huh? Why would I buy you a game? Know your place. What? Why? But what about sis? You bought her a video game for her last birthday, why can't I have it?
You should look at yourself in the mirror before saying such things. You're not cute like her and have no future prospects.
I don't want to waste money on you. I was still very young, and these words from my mother were just hurtful to me, as if she was simply telling me that I was not pretty enough, but now I know how much of a disqualified mother I am. But not only my mother, but also my father had the same idea, so my sister was the only one in the family who would take my side. I'll lend you my game, and let's go buy a new cartridge together. I'll help with the money, too. But why do Mom and Dad only say mean things to me? I haven't done anything wrong. I always try to be good.
Right. I don't like what our parents are doing either, but I'll always stand by you.
As I grew up, I began to question my parents' treatment of me and wondered why I was the only one who had to do this. My sister is doted on, so why don't they give me any love at all? Grandma lived nearby, and as soon as I realized I wasn't getting love from my parents, I frequently visited her. Grandma lived nearby, and once I realized I wasn't receiving love from my parents, I started visiting her frequently.
I'm back again, Grandma. Me too. I thought you two might come today, so I prepared some treats. Wow. Grandma, you're like a mind reader.
My grandmother lost my grandfather several years ago and now lives alone. I know she must be lonely living alone, but she was really happy when my sister and I went to visit her, and my sisters and I had the most fun when we played at our grandmother's house. And unlike my parents, my grandmother never separated me from my sister and I. It was the only space where I could feel at home and not close my heart to her. How happy I would have been if they had been as kind to me as my grandmother was. Many times I thought that and actually talked to her about it.
Have your father and mother's attitudes changed?
Yes, it's okay now.
Thank you, Grandma.
When I talked to my grandmother, she probably talked to my parents. That night, I was scolded by my parents. Don't talk about your family outside. I remember being scolded so and made to reflect on it all night as punishment. It was a traumatic experience, and since that time I have come to understand that a person's character is something that never changes. I want to live with my grandmother, not with my parents. How happy I would be if I could live with my grandmother. I think that was all I could think about at the time. Then one day. Hey, I'm going on a trip for 2 nights and 3 days. You stay here alone and look after the house. What? You're not taking me with you? Why waste money taking you? It's useless spending on someone like you who has no prospects. I don't really want to travel with my parents. Even if I went with them, they would leave me alone and I wouldn't have any fun. I knew that very well, and it wasn't that I wanted them to take me there because I wanted to have fun. But if they leave me alone, how will I live with myself for 3 days? I was only 10 years old at the time, and I couldn't cook. I've never even done housework. It's just too insane to leave my 10-year-old child behind when we go on an overnight trip. They have no responsibility as parents and it's over. But even as a 10-year-old, I knew that it was futile to ask for parental responsibility and common sense from someone who would make a distinction between sisters and change 180 degrees in the way they love kids. Grandma. I've come again. Sorry for always coming here. Welcome. Are you alone today? And you have a lot of luggage. My dad and mom, they took my sister with them on a trip and I have to stay home by myself. But I can't cook dinner or do anything. Can I stay at my grandma's house? When I said this, my grandmother opened her mouth wide in surprise. It's no wonder. Where are the parents who leave their 10-year-olds to go on vacation? Maybe if I call the police or the child support center, my parents will end up like this, but then what will happen to my sister? I didn't want my parents to be in trouble, I just wanted to be happy. That's why I didn't want any more big problems to happen because of me, and I think my grandmother probably scooped up my feelings about that. If you ever have a hard time, you can always come to Grandma, I'll always be there for you. Thank you, Grandma, but I'm just fine with you being here, Grandma. For the next 2 nights and 3 days I was able to forget about my parents and have a good time. When I wake up in the morning, breakfast is prepared and someone is there to eat it with me. Usually, I would have to eat it alone because there would be a pastry or a lunchbox from the grocery store on the table. When I finished eating, there is a grandmother who does the housework with me and goes to the park with me. That alone made me really happy. I have someone who cares about me. When I went to visit my grandma at her house, I got the same feeling, but by staying there for 2 days, that feeling turned into something bigger. I'm home. Huh? I thought you ran away from home because you got sick of it, but you came back. You didn't have to come back. Hey, Dad and Mom, that's really terrible. I feel sorry for her. You don't have to worry about such a badly made little sister. You are a promising girl and you should worry about her. I left and they didn't worry about me at all. When I returned home, my parents had already gone home. My parents had told me to stay home, so I thought they would be angry at me for leaving the house without permission, but the reply from my parents was appalling. I had already lost all feelings for my parents. I would grow up fast and leave this house soon. After I left home, I would insulate myself and live on my own. That's what I had come to think. However, one day when I turned 15 years old. That day came unexpectedly. When I came home from school, I found the house empty, with only a letter left behind. To my daughter, who is a failure, from now on she can live on her own. No. What in the world is going on? I don't think it was a letter left behind. There was only one line, you're a failure, and from now on, you'll have to live on your own. I don't understand what this means, I don't understand it at all. Where have my parents and sister gone and what are their plans? Are they just going on a long trip, or have they really abandoned me? Many speculations crossed my mind, but there was only one answer that made sense. She took my sister and abandoned me. That was all I could think of. How could they do this? Without saying anything to me, this is impossible. If it's a trip, there is no need to move the furniture in the house. The fact that it is all gone means that I have moved. I knew from a young age that they didn't need me, but now that I was all alone, I felt like I had a huge hole in my heart. Even if there was no bond or warmth there, I had a place to return to. I had my parents, even if they didn't talk to me, I had my sister. I didn't like my parents, but I guess somewhere in my heart their presence kept my spirit alive. Tears naturally came to my eyes and I felt despair for the life I was about to lead, but there was only one person I could rely on now. I quickly made my way to my grandmother's house. "Grandma, please help me."
What happened?
"Come inside first." Grandma said that, letting me into the house, soothing me as I was on the verge of tears.
It's like my mom and dad moved away with my sister. They didn't say anything to me. This is the only thing left behind. What am I supposed to do?
I said this and handed my grandmother the letter my parents had left for me. The moment she saw it, she crumpled up the letter and hugged me tightly. The warmth of my grandmother's body seemed to seep into mine, and I cried aloud. "Grandma, why? I wish I had never been born."
It's okay, it's okay. Forget about those heartless people. You are my treasure, a person with more worth living than them. So don't lose yourself.
My grandmother comforted me, and I managed to find a place of comfort. Then I went to live with my grandmother and my second life began.
Sorry I'm late, Grandma.
It can't be helped, you're busy. Let's take a break, shall we? Dinner is ready?
Yes.
In the beginning, I think I lost my smile for a while because the fact that my parents would abandon me was weighing on my mind. But my grandmother continued to be kind to me, and gradually I was able to regain hope for my life. It was truly terrifying to think what would have happened to me if my grandmother had not been there, and I felt from the bottom of my heart that I could never be thankful enough for that. And there is one more thing I have to thank my grandmother for.
I just solved the last error and published it online. I made a pretty decent brain training app. You should try it, Grandma.
My grandmother, who knew I had been good in science and math since high school, saw my talent and introduced me to one acquaintance. It was a junior employee of the company where my grandmother used to work, who is now an engineer. He was good friends with my grandmother and they still have tea together once a month. I learned programming from him and became immersed in his world.
It's very well done. Amazing. Right. It took over 3 months. I worked really hard.
With this, you might start an IT company and become wealthy. You think logically and can plan ahead. It's just an app made by a beginner, though. You may think so, but my eyes, having lived 3 times longer than you, see your success. I really enjoyed my new life with my grandmother, and I got hooked on programming, which I started learning on the first computer I touched. I had never even been given such an environment before, so I was open to how much fun there was in the world. It turned from a hobby into a skill, and by the time I graduated from high school, I had grown as a programmer to the point that I had created and released several web applications. I decided to live as a programmer and did not go to college. If I wanted to live as an engineer, I could have gone to a college with an engineering department, but I had some knowledge and I decided to get a job. That job was with a company owned by a friend of my grandmother's who taught me programming, and after working there for 2 years, I went out on my own.
I'll work hard. Thank you so much. I won't let you down, Grandma. I believe you can do it. I'm rooting for you.
My grandmother provided all the funds for my independence, and I worked hard to the death to get the company off the ground. As a result, the system I created was adopted by a major company, and the company grew rapidly. After that, I began to think about management not as an engineer but as the president of the company, and with the help of my grandmother, I was able to quickly grow the company into one of the most famous in the industry. One day in such a life. I worked until late that night, and when I came home, I saw 2 shoes of a strange man and woman at the entrance. I wondered if they had a visitor. Thinking so, I went to the living room, and to my surprise, there they were sitting, the hateful people I did not want to remember.
Oh my! It's been a while, hasn't it? I saw you on TV the other day. You were there, weren't you, like a commentator, a young CEO everyone's talking about? I was surprised to find out you were running a company.
There they were, my parents, who had abandoned me 5 years ago and were gone. Both of my parents were smiling, but my grandmother was looking at them with a glare. No wonder, what do they want after 5 years? It's as if they were people in a hurry to get back to the dump when they realized there were valuables in the trash they had thrown away. What do you want now? What business do you have with the people you threw away? Actually, we're in a bit of a financial bind. We tried to get your sister into a talent agency, but we were scammed. Your sister has closed off her heart, and we're left with debts. Could you possibly help us? You abandoned me, and now you come to me for help when things go bad for you. I won't let you say that you have forgotten what you did to me 5 years ago. What I have been through since you people abandoned me, how much my heart has been broken. No, it did not start 5 years ago. From the time I was a little girl, you abused me as a failure and never gave me any parental love. If they thought what they did was forgivable, they were wrong.
Can you stop belittling people? You're talking as if I'm some kind of tool for your convenience.
No, it's not like that. You were close to Grandma, so we thought it'd be better for you.
You think saying that excuses abandoning me? How dare you ask for such shameless favors after neglecting your responsibilities as parents?
I emotionally yelled at him to let out all the resentment I had been building up. You show up at my door and ask me to help you with money? I wish you'd stop belittling people. I don't have a dime to give you people, and if I had that kind of money to spare, I'd rather spend it on my grandmother. But why, Grandma? Why did you let these two in? I wanted them to understand what they did. Abandoning one daughter and using the other as a tool, unfit as parents, deserving hatred. I wanted them to feel that firsthand. I see. My grandmother hated my parents as much as I did, so I wondered why she invited these two people into her house, but that's what she meant. Certainly, considering their first words when I walked in, I don't think they felt any guilt towards me at all. It's a bit brazen, but I guess that's the way they are. That's why they wanted me to realize what kind of situation they were in. But perhaps it had that effect, because the leeway that they had just shown was gone, and their expressions were beginning to cloud over. We might have made you feel lonely, but we came back for you in the end.
And we raised you until you were 15. You can't say we owe you nothing?
Enough with the patronizing talk. What have you ever done for me? You stole my childhood, and yet. I'm sorry, but whatever you two say, I'm not going to reach out to you. Why don't you just make sure you suffer until the very end? I've suffered from you too as well, and it's all your own fault. That's right, so leave now. If you come near this house again, I won't stay quiet.
Wait, we're really in trouble. We can't even afford to live properly.
Yes, that's right. Your sister is suffering too. You used to love your sister, didn't you? If my sister is suffering, I'll help her, but not you two. The two of them made excuses to the end and seemed to be trying to get me to help them somehow, but I think they realized that my grandmother and I were serious. They didn't say anything more and kept quiet. However, my grandmother kicked them out and they were reluctant to leave, and I finally felt better. That was a surprise, seeing Mom and Dad here. I was surprised too, but with their history, I knew they'd come about money. I never expected them to be so shameless. You are so right. I am not their tool and I don't care if they want me to help them now. In fact, I'm even refreshed to know that I'm suffering. Considering how much I suffered as a child, my parents' suffering is nothing. I wonder where my sister is now. What she's doing. I hope she hasn't been ruined by our parents' misguided ambitions. About your sister. I can actually contact her. Would you like to meet? My grandmother told me that so I could blow it off. I really didn't care about my parents, but there was one thing that bothered me a little. It was my sister. I didn't have any contact information for her, and I didn't know where she was or what she was doing. But my sister, unlike my parents, was really worried about me, and more importantly, she was on my side. As I told those two, if it was just my sister, I would do whatever I could to help her. That's how much I appreciated her. I wonder where my sister is now, and what she's doing. I hope she hasn't been ruined by the effects of those two over-expecting her to go down a path she didn't want to go down. About your sister, actually, I can get in touch with her. Would you like to meet her, if it's okay with you? Hearing my grandmother say those words, I couldn't help but ask her back. I can get in touch with my sister. What in the world does that mean? What do you mean you can get in touch with my sister? How is that possible? Just recently, I got a call. She had a cell phone, so she had my contact information. She told me not to say anything to you. I didn't know why she told grandmother not to say anything, but anyway, my grandmother set up the place with my sister. My grandmother didn't give me any details and I don't know what is going on. But I get to see my sister for the first time in a long time. I was so happy and a little nervous that I couldn't sleep. And on that day. It's been so long, sis. Have you been doing well? Well, I'm doing well. After the sudden move, things were a bit of a mess, but I'm on my own now, and I'm able to spend some quality time without my family. I was relieved to see that my sister seemed to be doing better than I expected, but it seems that she had a pretty terrible life while I was living with my grandmother. Right after they moved, she began her full-fledged performing career, and she was not allowed to study properly. She was forced to take dance and singing lessons, and eventually even learned to act in a play, and her days were filled with fatigue from all the things she didn't want to do. Well, I didn't want to do these things, and the guy from the entertainment agency that those two were friends with was a scam artist. Eventually the money ran out and everything went back to normal. So I took advantage of that and left home and started living on my own. It was tough at first because I had no one to rely on, but now I feel like I'm somehow making a living. I guess our parents really thought of us sisters as their tools. I agreed with my sister from the bottom of my heart, and I was right not to offer any favors and not to help. What are you doing now for a living, sis? I'm working part-time to make ends meet, and I'm thinking of going to college. I need to get a job to survive in the future. I don't know what I want to do, so I haven't decided on anything yet. Why don't you try working at my company? If you're interested, I think I can train you from scratch to become an engineer. My sister was always on my side when I was little, and I was saved by her. That is why I wanted to do whatever I could do for her now. That was how I felt. I had made up my mind that even if she refused, I would support her in a different way. She gladly accepted my proposal. She then went to work for my company, and in less than a year, she had grown into a fine engineer. She is still contributing to my company as a major asset. Family is not something that can be explained only by blood ties. I don't consider my parents family, and I have no intention whatsoever of helping them, no matter how dire their situation may be. That is because of what my parents have done to us, and family ties do not exist there. A family is someone to whom you would give your all and still be willing to do something for that person. I will always cherish my two family members, my grandmother and my sister, and I will always live on.